Denise Harper stared at the pink slip in her trembling hands, the fluorescent lights of the corporate office buzzing overhead like angry wasps. After 5 years of perfect performance reviews, countless overtime hours, and bringing in over $2 million in new accounts, she was being let go due to budget cuts. The words felt like glass in her throat. "Mrs. Harper, you have 15 minutes to clear your desk," Robert Chin said coldly, not even looking up from his computer screen. His fingers moved across the keyboard with mechanical precision, as if erasing her existence was just another Tuesday task. The marketing department was eerily quiet. Her colleagues, people she'd shared birthday cakes and late-night project deadlines with, suddenly found their computer screens fascinating. Only Stephanie's quick glance and barely perceptible shake of the head gave Denise the confirmation she needed. This wasn't about budget cuts. This was about the discrimination complaint she'd filed last month. Her hands shook as she packed 5 years of her life into a cardboard box. The framed photo of Imani and Caleb at last summer's family reunion went in first, followed by her Employee of the Month awards that now felt like cruel jokes. The African violet her mother had given her for her first day sat wilted on the windowsill. She'd been too stressed to water it lately. The elevator ride down 32 floors felt like falling through quicksand. Each floor that passed was another year of her career, another dream dissolving. She'd worked so hard to get here, to prove that a girl from Southwest Atlanta could make it in corporate America. She'd been the first in her family to graduate college, the first to wear business suits and attend board meetings. And now, the parking garage was cold and echoing. Her BMW, the one she'd been so proud to buy last year, sat under the harsh fluorescent lights. She sat in the driver's seat for 10 minutes, crying until her chest hurt before finally starting the engine. The drive home was a blur of Atlanta traffic and tears. She kept rehearsing how she'd tell David, how she'd make him understand that this was temporary, that she'd find something else quickly. Her phone buzzed with text messages, probably Tanya wondering how the meeting went. Denise couldn't bear to look. When she pulled into their driveway in East Atlanta, David's car was already there. That was unusual, he never got home before 6. Her stomach clenched with an awful premonition as she gathered her box and purse, walking slowly to the front door of their 2-story colonial house. The door was unlocked. Inside, she could hear movement upstairs, drawers opening and closing, footsteps pacing back and forth. The children weren't home yet. They'd be at after-school care until 5:30. "David?" she called out, setting the box on their kitchen island. The granite countertops gleamed. She'd spent Saturday morning cleaning every surface, trying to make their home perfect. He appeared at the top of the stairs carrying a suitcase. His face was set in hard lines she'd never seen before, his jaw clenched tight. Behind him, she could see their bedroom door open, more suitcases on the bed. "What's happening?" she asked, though her heart already knew. David came down the stairs slowly, deliberately. When he reached the bottom, he wouldn't meet her eyes. "I heard about your job." "How did you?" "Robert Chin called me. Said they had to let you go." He set down the suitcase with a heavy thud. "I can't do this anymore, Denise." The words hit her like physical blows. "Can't do what?" "David, I'll find another job. This is just temporary." "It's not just the job." His voice was flat, emotionless. "It's everything. The stress, the fighting, the money problems. I married someone who was supposed to be successful, not someone who gets fired for causing trouble." "Causing trouble?" Her voice rose to a pitch she didn't recognize. "I filed a complaint because they passed me over for promotion 3 times and gave it to less qualified white men. That's not causing trouble, that's standing up for what's right. And look where it got you." He picked up his suitcase again. "Look where it got us. So you're just leaving? What about our vows? What about the children?" For the first time his facade cracked slightly. "I'll pay child support. But I can't be married to someone who doesn't know when to just keep her head down and do her job." The cruelty of it took her breath away. This was the man who'd whispered, "I love your strength," on their wedding night. The man who'd held her hand through 2 difficult pregnancies and promised they'd face everything together. "The kids will be home soon," she whispered. "I'll pick them up Friday for the weekend. After that." He shrugged. "We'll figure it out." He walked past her toward the door, pausing only to grab his keys from the hook. "I'm staying at Marcus's place. Have your lawyer call mine." The door closed with a soft click that sounded like the end of the world. Denise stood in her kitchen, their kitchen, surrounded by the life they'd built together. The school photos on the refrigerator, the world's best dad mug in the sink, the vacation brochures for Disney World they'd been planning for Christmas. All of it suddenly felt like evidence from someone else's life. She looked at the clock, 4:47 p.m. The children would be home in 43 minutes, expecting dinner, homework help, and the security of their intact family. How was she supposed to tell them that their world had just exploded? Her phone buzzed. A text from Imani's school. Reminder, science fair projects due Monday. Denise slid down the kitchen cabinets until she was sitting on the cold tile floor, her professional dress wrinkled around her. She put her head in her hands and sobbed for her job, for her marriage, for her children who didn't know yet that their father had chosen his own comfort over their family. Outside, she could hear Mrs. Ruby next door watering her garden, humming an old gospel song. The sound drifted through the window like a prayer, a reminder that the world was still turning even though hers had stopped. The sound of the school bus squealing to a stop outside felt like a countdown to the most difficult conversation of Denise's life. She'd managed to wash her face, change into jeans, and start dinner: chicken nuggets and mac and cheese, the kind of meal she usually reserved for emergencies. Today qualified. Imani burst through the front door first, her backpack flying behind her like a cape. At 8, she was all legs and curiosity, her hair in the neat cornrows Denise had braided that morning in what felt like another lifetime. Mama, guess what happened at school today? Imani's voice filled the house with its usual enthusiasm. Mrs. Peterson said my essay about Grandma's Civil Rights March was so good she wants to enter it in the district contest. Caleb followed more quietly, his 6-year-old frame small in the doorway. He was her sensitive one, the child who noticed when the mailman looked sad or when their neighbor's dog seemed lonely. His eyes went immediately to his mother's face. Mama, you look different, he said softly, dropping his Power Rangers backpack by the door. Denise knelt down and opened her arms. Both children rushed into them, and for a moment she could pretend that her world wasn't falling apart. They smelled like playground dirt and apple juice, like innocence and trust she was about to shatter. Where's Daddy? Imani asked, pulling back to look around the living room. His car was in the driveway when the bus dropped us off, but now it's gone. Denise's throat felt like sandpaper. Come sit with me in the living room. We need to talk. Something in her tone made both children go very still. Caleb's thumb found its way to his mouth, a habit he'd broken months ago. Imani's eyes, so much like David's, searched her mother's face for clues. They settled on the couch together, Denise in the middle with a child on each side. Through the window, she could see Mrs. Ruby tending to her roses, the old woman's movements careful and deliberate. How many difficult conversations had these walls witnessed over the years? Sometimes, Denise began, her voice carefully controlled, grown-ups have to make very hard decisions. And sometimes those decisions change things for the whole family. Is Daddy sick? Caleb whispered, his eyes wide with worry. No, baby. Daddy's not sick. She took a deep breath. But Daddy and we're not going to be married anymore. The silence that followed was deafening. Imani's face scrunched up in confusion. What do you mean? Like divorce? Like Auntie Tanya and Uncle Jerome? Yes, sweetheart. Like that. Caleb's thumb went deeper into his mouth. Is it because of something we did? Oh, baby, no. Denise pulled him closer, her heart breaking at the question. This is not about you. This is never about you. You and Imani are the best things that ever happened to me. This is about grown-up problems that have nothing to do with how much we love you. But where will Daddy live? Imani's practical mind was already working through the logistics. Will we still see him? Daddy's going to live somewhere else, but yes, you'll still see him. He'll pick you up on weekends and... What about our family trips? Imani interrupted. What about Disney World at Christmas? Denise felt like she was drowning. I don't know, sweetie. We'll figure all of that out. Caleb started to cry, not the loud, dramatic tears of a scraped knee, but the quiet, devastating sobs of a child whose world had just shifted on its axis. Imani wrapped her arms around him protectively, her own eyes filling with tears. It's going to be okay, Denise whispered, though she wasn't sure she believed it herself. We're going to be okay. They sat together on the couch as the shadows grew longer, 3 people trying to hold together what felt like the end of everything they'd known. Finally, Imani spoke up. Mama, why does your face look like you've been crying all day? Denise almost smiled at her daughter's directness. Because I lost my job today too. Both children stared at her. Both things happened today? Imani asked in disbelief. Both things. That's not fair, Caleb said fiercely, his thumb finally leaving his mouth. That's not fair at all. You're right, baby. It's not fair. The phone rang, jarring them all. Denise didn't recognize the number, but something made her answer. Denise? It's Tanya. Girl, I've been calling and texting all afternoon. How did the meeting go? Tanya's warm voice was like a lifeline. "Can you come over?" Denise managed to say. I need help. I'm already in my car." 20 minutes later, Tanya Brooks burst through the front door like a force of nature. At 29, she was 3 years younger than Denise but had the kind of steady strength that made her seem older. Her nurse's training kicked in immediately as she assessed the situation. 2 children with red-rimmed eyes, their mother looking like she'd been hit by a truck. "Imani, Caleb, go wash up for dinner," Tanya said gently but firmly. "I need to talk to your mama for a minute." When the children were upstairs, Denise collapsed into her best friend's arms and told her everything. About the firing, about David's calculated cruelty, about having to shatter her children's sense of security. "That son of a..." Tanya caught herself. "I'm sorry. I know he's their father, but right now I want to..." "I know." Denise wiped her eyes. "I keep thinking this is a nightmare I'm going to wake up from. How much money do you have saved?" "Maybe 3 months of expenses if I'm careful." David handled most of the bills. The reality of her financial situation hit her like another blow. "I don't even know what our health insurance situation is now." Tanya was quiet for a moment, her mind working. "Okay, first things first. You need a lawyer. My cousin Jerome went through a rough divorce last year, and his attorney was amazing. Second, you need to file for unemployment benefits tomorrow. Third, you're going to stay strong because those babies upstairs need you to be their rock." "I don't feel strong." "Strength isn't about feeling strong, honey. It's about doing what needs to be done when everything inside you wants to fall apart." Tanya squeezed her hand. "And you've got people who love you. Starting with me." From upstairs, they could hear water running and the soft murmur of the children talking to each other. Denise wondered what they were saying, how they were processing this earthquake in their small world. "There's something else," Denise said quietly. "I think David's been planning this for a while. He was too ready, too prepared. Like he was just waiting for an excuse." The thought had been growing in her mind since he'd walked out the door with his perfectly packed suitcases. The lack of surprise on his face, the rehearsed quality of his words. This wasn't a spontaneous decision born of shock and stress. This was an exit strategy. "Then he's a bigger fool than I thought," Tanya said fiercely. "Because he just walked away from the best thing that ever happened to him." As if summoned by their conversation, both children appeared at the bottom of the stairs. Caleb was holding Imani's hand, and they both looked slightly older than they had an hour ago. "Auntie Tanya," Imani said solemnly, "are you going to help us take care of Mama?" "You bet I am, baby girl." "Good," Caleb said with surprising firmness. "Because we're a family. Even if Daddy doesn't want to be part of it anymore." The wisdom and resilience in her 6-year-old's voice broke Denise's heart and put it back together again in the same moment. They were going to be okay. They had to be. The next morning arrived gray and drizzling, matching Denise's mood as she sat at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a stack of bills. The children had gone to school with forced smiles and brave faces that broke her heart. Imani had asked if she should tell her teacher about the divorce, and Caleb had been unusually quiet during breakfast. She'd already called in sick to work before remembering she didn't have a job to call into. The unemployment benefits website was a maze of forms and requirements that made her head spin. Every question felt like a judgment. Reason for separation from employer. Income from spouse. Dependent children. A gentle knock at the door interrupted her frustrated sighs. Through the peephole, she saw Mrs. Ruby Washington standing on her porch with a covered casserole dish. At 72, their neighbor moved with the careful dignity of someone who'd weathered many storms. "Morning, honey," Mrs. Ruby said when Denise opened the door. "I hope you don't mind me dropping by, but I made too much tuna casserole last night and thought you might could use some help with dinner." They both knew it was a kind lie. Mrs. Ruby had probably seen David leave with his suitcases yesterday and connected the dots. In their close-knit East Atlanta neighborhood, news traveled fast, and Mrs. Ruby had appointed herself the unofficial keeper of everyone's well-being. "That's so thoughtful, Mrs. Ruby. Would you like some coffee?" "I'd love some if you don't mind the company." Mrs. Ruby settled into the kitchen chair like she belonged there, her silver hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. Her dark eyes, sharp with intelligence, took in the bills spread across the table and Denise's hollow expression. "Rough patch?" she asked gently. Something about the older woman's presence made it safe to be honest. "The roughest. Lost my job Monday, husband left the same day. I'm sitting here trying to figure out how to keep my children fed and housed." Mrs. Ruby reached across the table and covered Denise's hand with her own. Her skin was soft but her grip was firm, the hands of someone who'd raised 6 children and buried a husband but never lost her faith in better days. Child, I've lived in this neighborhood for 47 years. I've seen folks go through everything you can imagine: job loss, divorce, sickness, death. You know what I've learned? The storm always passes, but you don't have to weather it alone. I feel so stupid. I should have seen this coming. Should have protected my children better. Honey, you can't protect your babies from everything, and trying to will drive you crazy. What you can do is show them how to bounce back when life knocks you down. Mrs. Ruby sipped her coffee thoughtfully. Those children of yours are watching how you handle this. They're learning what strength looks like. I don't feel strong. I feel terrified. Scared and strong aren't opposites, baby. Some of the strongest people I know were shaking in their boots while they did what needed doing. The doorbell rang, and through the window, Denise could see a woman in a business suit standing on her porch. Her heart sank. Probably someone from the bank or insurance company, ready to deliver more bad news. Instead, when she opened the door, she found an elegant black woman in her mid-50s with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. Mrs. Harper? I'm Pastor Gloria Mitchell from Mount Olive Baptist Church. Your friend Tanya Brooks asked me to stop by. Denise felt a flush of embarrassment. She wasn't particularly religious, though she'd grown up in church. I'm sorry, Pastor Mitchell, but I'm really not in the headspace for. I'm not here to preach, honey. I'm here because Tanya told me you might need some practical help, and that's what we do. Pastor Gloria smiled warmly. May I come in? Soon the three women were sitting around Denise's kitchen table, and somehow the overwhelming pile of problems began to feel manageable. Pastor Gloria had connections: a lawyer who did pro bono work for single mothers, a job placement service that specialized in helping people who'd faced discrimination, a children's counselor who understood divorce trauma. The church has a food pantry, Pastor Gloria explained, and we run a free after-school program. Your children could start today if you'd like. It would give you time to handle the business side of things without worrying about childcare. I can't afford. Nobody's asking you to pay anything. We take care of our community, period. Pastor Gloria's voice was firm but gentle. You're not a charity case, Denise. You're a mother who needs some help getting back on her feet. There's a difference. Mrs. Ruby nodded approvingly. I told you, the village takes care of its own. For the first time in 2 days, Denise felt like she could breathe. Why are you all being so kind to me? You barely know me. I know enough, Mrs. Ruby said. I know you work hard, love your children, and keep your yard nice. I know you always speak when you see me outside, and you helped me carry groceries when I hurt my back last winter. That's enough for me. Pastor Gloria leaned forward. And I know that Tanya Brooks doesn't make friends lightly. If she called me at 6 in the morning worried about you, then you're family to her. That makes you family to us. The simplicity of it was overwhelming. In the corporate world she'd just left, every relationship was transactional, every favor came with strings attached. Here in her own neighborhood, surrounded by women who'd known struggle themselves, help came freely given. There's one more thing, Pastor Gloria said, pulling out a business card. Attorney Lisa Thompson. She specializes in employment discrimination and family law. Tanya gave her the basics, and she wants to see you today if possible. Denise looked at the card with disbelief. Today? But I can't afford. She takes cases on contingency sometimes, meaning you don't pay unless you win. And from what Tanya told me, you've got a strong case. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of phone calls and appointments. Mrs. Ruby volunteered to pick up the children from school and take them to the church program. Pastor Gloria made calls on Denise's behalf, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to getting things done. By noon, Denise had an appointment with the lawyer at 2 o'clock and 3 job leads for the following week. I don't know how to thank you, Denise said as Pastor Gloria prepared to leave. You thank us by getting back on your feet and helping the next person who needs it, the pastor replied. That's how community works. After they left, Denise sat alone in her kitchen, staring at the business cards and phone numbers scattered across her table. 2 days ago, her life had felt like a single thread stretched to breaking. Now she could see the web of support that had always been there, waiting for her to need it. She picked up her phone and called Tanya. How are you holding up? Tanya answered on the first ring. Better. Your pastor friend is amazing. So is Mrs. Ruby. Pastor Gloria saved my life when Jerome and I divorced. And Mrs. Ruby? That woman is a treasure. She raised 6 kids, mostly on her own after her husband died. If anybody knows about starting over, it's her. Why didn't you tell me you called them? Because you would have said no. You're proud, Denise, and that's not a bad thing. But pride won't feed your babies or keep the lights on. Sometimes we all need help. Through her kitchen window, Denise could see Mrs. Ruby in her backyard, hanging laundry on the line even though it was still drizzling. The older woman moved with purpose, each clothespin placed with care. There was something beautiful about the simple ritual, the faith that the sun would come out and dry the clothes. Tanya? Yeah. Thank you. For everything. For not letting me go through this alone. That's what sisters do, honey. Blood or not. As Denise hung up and prepared for her appointment with the lawyer, she felt something she hadn't felt in days: hope. Not the naive kind that ignored reality, but the stubborn kind that refused to give up even when everything looked impossible. Her children would be home in a few hours and she'd have real answers to give them. Tomorrow they'd start at the church program, surrounded by people who cared about their well-being. And maybe, just maybe, she'd start to rebuild something better than what she'd lost. Attorney Lisa Thompson's office was nothing like the sterile corporate environments Denise was used to. Located in a renovated Victorian house in Grant Park, it felt warm and welcoming, with artwork from local black artists covering the walls and the scent of vanilla candles in the air. Lisa herself was equally reassuring, a woman in her early 40s with natural hair, kind eyes behind stylish glasses, and the kind of presence that made you feel heard before you even spoke. She greeted Denise with a firm handshake and a genuine smile. Tanya told me a little about your situation, Lisa said as they settled in her office. But I want to hear everything from you. Start from the beginning. For the next hour, Denise laid out the whole story. The pattern of being passed over for promotions despite excellent performance. The inappropriate comments from male colleagues that were dismissed as office humor. The way her suggestions were ignored in meetings only to be praised when repeated by male co-workers. And finally, the discrimination complaint that had led to her termination. Lisa took careful notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. Her expression grew more serious as the story unfolded. Do you have documentation of any of this? Lisa asked. Some. I kept copies of my performance reviews, emails about the promotion decisions, records of the complaints I filed with HR. Denise pulled out a folder she'd assembled that morning. I probably should have documented more, but I kept thinking if I just worked harder, proved myself more. That's a common response. You shouldn't blame yourself for believing the system would be fair. Lisa reviewed the documents carefully. This is good. Very good. Have you received your final paycheck yet? No, they said it would be mailed. Don't be surprised if they try to make you sign something to get it. Don't sign anything without calling me first, understood? They spent another 30 minutes going over the timeline and potential witnesses. Lisa explained the legal process, the timeline for filing with the EEOC, and what to expect. I have to ask about the divorce situation, Lisa said gently. Are you planning to represent yourself, or will you need family law help as well? I don't know. David said to have my lawyer call his, but I don't even know who his lawyer is yet. I can recommend someone excellent. What's your housing situation? Do you own or rent? We own. Well, we have a mortgage. The reality hit her again. She had no income and a mortgage payment due in 2 weeks. That's going to be important in the divorce proceedings. Georgia is an equitable distribution state, which means marital assets get divided fairly, not necessarily equally. But fair can work in your favor, especially if you're the primary caregiver. When Denise left Lisa's office an hour later, she felt like she finally had an advocate, someone who understood the system and knew how to fight it. More importantly, she felt like her experience mattered, that what had happened to her was real and actionable. Her phone rang as she was walking to her car. David's name appeared on the screen. She almost let it go to voicemail, then thought better of it. Hello, David. Denise. His voice was strained. We need to talk about the kids. I want to take them this weekend like I said. Are you going to tell them where you're living? What happened between us? I thought we could figure that out together. Maybe meet for coffee tomorrow? The audacity of it took her breath away. Yesterday he'd been cold and cruel, walking out like their 15-year relationship meant nothing. Now he wanted to figure things out together, like they were co-workers planning a project. David, you left. You chose to walk away from this family. You don't get to control how we handle that. I'm still their father, Denise. Yes, you are. And they love you and miss you and don't understand why you left them. Her voice broke slightly. Caleb asked if it was something he did wrong. Imani wants to know if we can still take our Christmas trip. The silence on the other end stretched long enough that she wondered if he'd hung up. I never wanted to hurt the kids, he said finally. But you did. You walked out on them with no explanation, no conversation, no consideration for how it would affect them. And you did it on the same day their mother lost her job. The anger she'd been suppressing for 2 days finally bubbled to the surface. So no, David, we can't just figure it out together, like this is some minor disagreement. What do you want me to do, Denise? I can't undo what's done. I want you to take responsibility for the choice you made. I want you to think about someone other than yourself for 5 minutes. And I want you to understand that seeing the kids is a privilege you're going to have to earn back. You can't keep me from my children. I'm not keeping you from them. But I'm not going to let you traumatize them further by treating this like it's no big deal. She took a deep breath. If you want to see them this weekend, you need to have a real conversation with them. Not some sanitized version where you pretend this is mutual or temporary. They deserve honesty. Another long pause. I'll pick them up Friday at 6. David? She caught him before he could hang up. They're going to ask you questions. Hard questions. Be prepared to answer them honestly or don't come at all. After she hung up, Denise sat in her car outside Lisa's office and cried. Not the desperate sobs of yesterday, but the cleansing tears of someone finally standing up for herself and her children. It felt terrifying and empowering at the same time. Her phone buzzed with a text from Tanya. How did it go with Lisa? Good. Really good. She thinks I have a strong case. Told you. Want to grab dinner? My treat. Can't. Need to pick up the kids from church. Rain check. Tomorrow. We're celebrating your first step toward justice. Justice. The word felt foreign in her mouth, like a language she was just learning to speak. For so many years, she'd accepted unfairness as the price of admission to spaces that weren't built for her. She'd smiled when she wanted to scream, stayed quiet when she should have spoken up, convinced herself that working twice as hard would eventually be enough. But sitting in Lisa's office, laying out the pattern of discrimination and seeing it reflected back as illegal and actionable, something had shifted. This wasn't about her failing to adapt to an unfair system. This was about the system being wrong. She drove to Mount Olive Baptist Church feeling lighter than she had in months. The after-school program was housed in a bright, modern building behind the main sanctuary, and she could hear children's laughter echoing through the halls. Imani and Caleb were in the arts and crafts room, working on what appeared to be paper plate masks. Caleb's was decorated with elaborate purple swirls, while Imani had created what looked like a superhero face with glitter and feathers. Mama? Caleb ran to her, holding up his creation. Miss Sandra taught us about emotions today. This is my feeling better face. It's beautiful, baby. What makes you feel better? Art. And singing. And knowing you're not sad anymore. Her heart clenched. He'd been watching her so carefully, this sensitive little boy who noticed everything. And my superhero face is for protecting our family, Imani announced, striking a pose with her mask. Miss Sandra says superheroes are just regular people who decide to be brave when things get scary. That's very true, Denise agreed, thinking about her conversation with David, about standing up to her former employer, about all the small acts of courage that were slowly rebuilding her life. As they gathered their backpacks and artwork, a young woman approached them. She was petite with warm brown eyes and the kind of gentle energy that made children gravitate toward her. Mrs. Harper? I'm Sandra Williams, the program coordinator. Could I speak with you for a moment? They stepped aside while the children finished cleaning up. I wanted you to know that both Imani and Caleb did wonderfully today, Sandra said. They're clearly dealing with some big changes, but they're incredibly resilient. Caleb was very quiet at first, but he opened up during art time. And Imani? That girl has natural leadership qualities. She was helping other kids with their projects without being asked. How much did they tell you about our situation? Just that their family is going through some changes. I work with a lot of children from divorced families, Mrs. Harper. What I can tell you is that kids are amazingly adaptable, especially when they feel secure in their parents' love. And it's clear your children feel very loved. As they walked to the car, Imani slipped her hand into Denise's. Mama, Miss Sandra asked us what we were grateful for today. You want to know what I said? What, sweetheart? I said I was grateful that even though everything is different now, you're still our mama and you still love us the same. Denise had to stop walking for a moment, overwhelmed by her daughter's simple wisdom. You're right, baby girl. No matter what else changes, that will always stay the same. And tomorrow I'm going to show Daddy my superhero mask, Imani continued. Maybe he needs to remember how to be brave too. Out of the mouths of babes, Denise thought. Maybe they were all learning to be braver than they thought possible. Friday evening arrived with the weight of anticipation and dread. Denise had spent the week juggling unemployment paperwork, job applications, and helping the children adjust to their new routine at the church program. She'd also had 3 promising job interviews lined up for the following week, thanks to Pastor Gloria's connections. The children had been asking about their father all week, when he was coming, where he was living, whether they'd like his new place. Denise had answered as honestly as she could while trying to protect them from the worst of her own hurt and anger. At exactly 6 o'clock, David's car pulled into the driveway. Through the window, Denise could see him sitting for a moment, gathering courage or rehearsing what he'd say. The children were ready with overnight bags and excited chatter about showing him their schoolwork and new art projects. When the doorbell rang, both kids raced to answer it. Denise followed more slowly, steeling herself for what would be their first real interaction since that terrible Monday. David looked smaller somehow, less confident than the man who'd walked out with such cold certainty. His clothes were wrinkled and there were dark circles under his eyes. When Imani threw herself into his arms, his composure cracked visibly. "Hey, princess," he murmured into her hair. "I missed you." Caleb hung back slightly, studying his father with the careful attention he usually reserved for new situations. Finally, he stepped forward for a hug, but it was more tentative than his usual exuberant greetings. "Where have you been living, Daddy?" Imani asked with characteristic directness. David glanced at Denise, then back at his daughter. "I'm staying with Uncle Marcus for now, while Mama and I figure some things out." "Are you getting a divorce?" The question came from Caleb, his voice barely above a whisper. David knelt down to be at eye level with both children. To his credit, he didn't deflect or lie. "Yes, buddy. We are." "Is it because Mama lost her job?" Imani's logic was painfully clear. "No, sweetheart. It's because..." David struggled for words. Sometimes grown-ups realize they want different things, and they can't figure out how to want the same things anymore. It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't a lie either. Denise felt a grudging respect for his honesty, even as her heart broke watching her children process this information. "But you still love us, right?" Caleb asked, his thumb finding its way toward his mouth. "More than anything in the whole world," David said firmly. "That will never ever change." They talked for a few more minutes about the weekend plans. David was taking them to see a movie and then to Chuck E. Cheese, apparently attempting to make their first post-separation weekend special. As they gathered their bags and headed for the door, Imani suddenly turned back. "Mama, are you going to be okay by yourself?" "I'm going to be fine, baby. Auntie Tanya is coming over and we're going to have a grown-up movie night." It was only half true Tanya was coming over, but mostly to make sure Denise didn't spend the weekend spiraling into despair. After they left, the house felt unnaturally quiet. Denise wandered from room to room, straightening things that didn't need straightening, trying to fill the silence with activity. She was loading the dishwasher when her phone rang. Unknown number appeared on the screen. Lately, those calls were either debt collectors or robocalls, but something made her answer. "Is this Denise Harper?" The voice was professional but cold. "Yes, who's calling?" "This is Amanda Chin from Pinnacle Marketing. I'm Robert Chen's assistant. Mr. Chin asked me to call regarding your final paycheck and separation agreement." Robert Chin. The man who'd fired her with such callous efficiency. "What about them?" "Your final check is ready for pickup, but you'll need to sign the separation agreement first. It's standard procedure. I'll need to review any documents with my attorney before signing anything." There was a pause. "Mrs. Harper, this is just a formality. The separation agreement simply states that you won't pursue any legal action against the company in exchange for your final pay and a positive reference." Lisa's warning echoed in her mind. "Don't sign anything without calling me first." "I understand. I'll review it with my lawyer and get back to you. The offer expires Monday at 5 p.m. After that, the company can't guarantee the reference or the expedited processing of your final pay." The threat was clear but professionally veiled. "Sign this, take your money and go away quietly. Don't cause trouble." "I'll be in touch," Denise said and hung up. She immediately called Lisa, who answered on the second ring despite it being after hours. "Don't even think about signing that," Lisa said after hearing the details. "That separation agreement is exactly what we expected. They're worried about your discrimination complaint, and they want you to waive your rights in exchange for money they legally owe you anyway. But what if they refuse to give me a reference? I need to find work." "Denise, listen to me. If they're this eager to make you sign a waiver, it means they know they're in the wrong. That makes our case stronger, not weaker. And employers who illegally terminate someone rarely give good references anyway. So what do I do?" "You let them keep your final paycheck for now. I know it's hard when money's tight, but that check isn't worth signing away your rights." We'll get you much more than one paycheck when we win this case. After hanging up with Lisa, Denise sat in her kitchen feeling the weight of the decision. That final paycheck would cover groceries for a month, maybe 2 if she was careful. But signing the agreement would mean accepting that what happened to her was okay, that companies could discriminate and then buy their way out of consequences. The phone rang again. Tanya's name appeared on the screen. "I'm in your driveway with Chinese food and wine. Open up." Tanya breezed in, carrying bags that smelled like heaven and a bottle of Moscato. "Okay, report. How did the handoff go with David?" As they spread Chinese takeout across the coffee table, Denise filled her in on David's conversation with the kids and the call from Pinnacle Marketing. "They're scared," Tanya said definitively after hearing about the separation agreement. "Companies don't offer hush money unless they know they messed up." Lisa said the same thing. "But it's hard to turn down money I desperately need on the principle of the thing." "It's not just principle though. It's about what you're teaching Imani and Caleb. About what you're teaching yourself." Tanya poured wine into 2 mismatched glasses. "You remember when Jerome and I got divorced?" "Of course. His lawyer kept pushing for me to accept this terrible settlement because fighting would be expensive and uncertain. Said I should just be grateful for what I could get and move on." Tanya took a sip of wine. "You know what you told me?" Denise shook her head. "You said, Tanya, you're worth fighting for. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. You drove me to every meeting with my lawyer, helped me organize my documentation, watched the kids when I had to go to court. You never once told me to just take the easy way out. That was different. Jerome was trying to cheat you out of assets you'd earned. How is this different? You earned your job, you did the work, you followed the rules. They cheated you out of advancement and then fired you for speaking up. If anything, this is worse because it affects other women who work there too." They were quiet for a moment, picking at lo mein and thinking. Outside, the neighborhood was settling into its Friday evening rhythm, kids playing in yards, families gathering for dinner, the comfortable sounds of community life. "You know what the hardest part is?" Denise said finally. "I keep thinking about all the times I stayed quiet when I should have spoken up. All the inappropriate comments I let slide, the credit I didn't fight for, the meetings where I was talked over and said nothing. I feel like I'm partially responsible for what happened." "Stop that right now." Tanya's voice was fierce. "You survived in a hostile environment the best way you knew how. That doesn't make you responsible for their behavior. But if I'd spoken up sooner, you might have been fired sooner. Or labeled a troublemaker and passed over for everything. The system was rigged against you from the start, Denise. You didn't create that system and you're not responsible for fixing it by yourself. But I can try to fix it for the next woman who comes along. Now you're thinking like the woman I know and love." They spent the rest of the evening watching romantic comedies and eating ice cream directly from the container. For a few hours, Denise almost forgot about the chaos of her life. But when Tanya left around 11, the silence rushed back in. She walked through the house, checking locks and turning off lights, then stopped in the children's rooms. Imani's bed was neatly made, her science fair project materials organized on her desk. Caleb's room was its usual creative chaos, art supplies scattered across every surface. Tomorrow they'd come home with stories about their weekend with Daddy, probably excited and confused and full of questions she didn't have answers for. But tonight, for the first time in a week, she felt clear about one thing. She wasn't going to sign that separation agreement. She wasn't going to let Pinnacle Marketing buy her silence. She was going to fight, not just for herself, but for every woman who'd been in her position and stayed quiet because speaking up seemed too risky. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is David. Kids are asleep. Thank you for handling everything so well today. I know I don't deserve your grace, but I'm grateful for it." She stared at the message for a long time before typing back. "They're good kids. They deserve parents who do better." She didn't add what she was thinking, that doing better meant fighting for what was right, even when it was hard. Even when it was scary. Especially then. Monday morning brought a crisp autumn chill and a renewed sense of purpose. Denise had slept better than she had in weeks, her decision about the separation agreement bringing an unexpected peace. The children had returned from their weekend with David quiet but not traumatized, full of stories about movies and arcade games but also thoughtful questions about their new reality. Her first interview was at 10 a.m. with a nonprofit organization that provided job training for women re-entering the workforce. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was interviewing to help other women while navigating her own career crisis. The offices of New Beginnings were housed in a converted warehouse in the old Fourth Ward, with exposed brick walls and floor-to-ceiling windows that filled the space with natural light. Denise arrived 15 minutes early, wearing her best interview suit and carrying a portfolio that felt strangely light without company materials and corporate presentations. "Mrs. Harper?" A woman in her early 30s approached with a warm smile. "I'm Crystal Patterson, the program director. Thank you for coming in." Crystal led her to a conference room where two other people were waiting, an older black man in a cardigan who introduced himself as Dr. James Franklin, the executive director, and a younger woman named Maria Santos who ran the marketing program. "We've reviewed your resume and portfolio," Dr. Franklin began, "and we're impressed with your experience. But what really caught our attention was the recommendation from Pastor Gloria Mitchell. She speaks very highly of your character and your current situation." Denise felt a flush of embarrassment. "I hope my personal circumstances don't reflect negatively on my qualifications." "Quite the opposite," Crystal said gently. "We serve women who are often facing their own crises, divorce, job loss, domestic violence, returning from incarceration. Having someone on staff who understands that struggle firsthand is invaluable." They spent the next hour discussing the position, developing curricula for job readiness programs, running workshops on interview skills and workplace navigation, and connecting with local employers to create pathways for program graduates. The work would be meaningful but challenging, requiring someone who could relate to women facing systemic barriers while maintaining professional boundaries. "Can I ask you something?" Maria leaned forward, her expression curious. "Pastor Gloria mentioned you're considering legal action against your former employer. How would you balance that with work here if you were offered the position?" It was a fair question, and Denise appreciated the directness. "I've thought about that. The legal process will require some time and attention, but I'm committed to justice, both for myself and for other women who might face similar situations. I think that commitment would make me better at this job, not worse." Dr. Franklin nodded approvingly. "We believe in fighting systemic inequality here. A staff member who's willing to stand up for herself is exactly the kind of person we want working with our clients." The interview ended with promises to be in touch by the end of the week. As Denise walked to her car, she felt cautiously optimistic. The work felt right in a way her corporate job never had, like she could use her skills for something that mattered beyond profit margins and market share. Her phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. Probably another debt collector or robocall, but she answered anyway. "Is this Denise Harper?" The voice was young, nervous. "Yes, who's calling?" "This is Stephanie Martinez. I used to work with you at Pinnacle Marketing?" "In the marketing department?" "Stephanie." The coworker who'd given her that meaningful look when she was being fired. "Of course, Stephanie. How are you?" "Not great, actually. I heard about what happened to you and I need to tell you something. But not over the phone. Could we meet somewhere?" They agreed to meet at a coffee shop in Virginia Highland in an hour. Denise spent the drive wondering what Stephanie could possibly want to discuss. They'd been friendly colleagues but not close friends, often working on parallel projects with minimal interaction. She found Stephanie already at a corner table, nervously stirring a latte that looked untouched. At 26, Stephanie was the youngest person in their former department, a recent MBA graduate who'd been hired 6 months before Denise's termination. "Thank you for meeting me," Stephanie said as Denise sat down. "I wasn't sure if you'd want to see anyone from Pinnacle." "It's fine. What's going on?" Stephanie looked around the coffee shop nervously, then leaned forward. "They fired me on Friday." "What? Why?" "Officially? Budget cuts. Same reason they gave you." Stephanie's laugh was bitter. "But I know the real reason. After you left, I started paying more attention to how things worked there. The patterns you probably saw, but I was too naive to notice." Denise waited, sensing there was more. "Last week, I was in Robert Chen's office for a project review when his computer chimed with an email. He had his screen angled where I could see it. It was from the company's employment lawyer, asking about potential additional complainants in your discrimination case." Denise's pulse quickened. "What did it say exactly?" "Something about reviewing personnel files for other women who might have similar complaints. They were particularly concerned about recent hires who might have witnessed problematic behavior." Stephanie met her eyes. "I was hired right before you filed your complaint. I've seen everything you saw, the inappropriate comments, the way female employees get talked over in meetings, the way our ideas get credited to men. And they fired you because they were worried you'd support my case?" "I think so. But here's the thing, they made a mistake with my severance paperwork. They offered me the same kind of separation agreement they probably offered you, but they included some internal emails by accident." Stephanie pulled out her phone and showed Denise a series of email screenshots. As she read, Denise felt her anger building. The emails discussed managing the Harper situation, strategies for limiting exposure, and most damning, a chain where Robert Chin asked the legal team about cleaning house of potential sympathizers. They can't legally retaliate against employees for participating in discrimination investigations, Denise said, her mind racing. I know. I've been researching employment law all weekend. Stephanie paused. I want to join your lawsuit. If you'll have me. They spent the next 2 hours going through everything Stephanie had witnessed and documented. It was extensive, not just the discrimination Denise had faced, but a systematic pattern of gender bias that affected multiple employees. Stephanie had been keeping detailed notes, initially just to understand the corporate culture but now invaluable as evidence. There's something else, Stephanie said as they prepared to leave. Jennifer Walsh from accounting has been asking questions about whether she can file a complaint too. Apparently, she's been dealing with sexual harassment from her supervisor for months. The scope of the problem was bigger than Denise had realized. This wasn't just about her individual experience, it was about a culture of discrimination that affected multiple women. As they parted ways, with plans for Stephanie to contact Lisa Thompson immediately, Denise felt a mix of emotions. Anger at the systemic nature of what they'd all endured. Gratitude for Stephanie's courage in coming forward. And something else, a sense of responsibility that went beyond her personal situation. She called Lisa as soon as she got home. This changes everything, Lisa said after hearing the details. Retaliation is easier to prove than discrimination, and if we can show a pattern of behavior affecting multiple employees, our case becomes much stronger. What happens next? I need to meet with Stephanie immediately. And we should reach out to this Jennifer Walsh person too. If Pinnacle is systematically discriminating against women, we might be looking at a class action lawsuit. A class action lawsuit. The phrase felt both thrilling and terrifying. What would that mean for me personally? Potentially much better compensation, but also a longer, more complex legal process. And more public attention. Are you prepared for that? Denise thought about Imani and Caleb, about the conversation she'd had with Tanya about fighting for the next woman who came along. I think so. But I need to discuss it with my children first. Of course. Take your time to think about it. But Denise? What you started by filing that original complaint, it's bigger than you knew. You've given other women permission to speak up. After hanging up, Denise sat in her quiet house processing the day's revelations. When she'd filed her discrimination complaint, she'd thought she was fighting for herself. Now she realized she'd lit a fuse that was exposing a much larger problem. The children would be home from the after-school program soon, and she needed to figure out how to explain that their mother was about to become the lead plaintiff in what could be a major employment lawsuit. But first, she called the one person who would help her think through the implications. Tanya? Are you busy? I need to talk through something big. Always got time for you. What's happening? As Denise filled her in on the day's developments, she felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. This wasn't just about her anymore. Other women were counting on her to see this through, to fight not just for herself but for all of them. It was scary and empowering at the same time. She'd gone from being one woman who'd lost her job to being the voice for multiple women who'd been silenced. The stakes were higher now, but so was the potential impact. So what are you thinking? Tanya asked after hearing everything. I'm thinking this is bigger than I ever imagined. And I'm thinking I can't back down now. Good. Because the Denise I know doesn't back down when other people are counting on her. Through the window, she could see Mrs. Ruby watering her roses in the late afternoon sun. The older woman looked up and waved, and Denise waved back. Soon she'd need to tell the children about the lawsuit, about the choice she was making to fight publicly for something she believed in. But first, she'd enjoy this moment of quiet determination, this sense of purpose that felt like coming home to herself after years of trying to fit into spaces that were never meant for her. The call came at 7:30 on a Tuesday morning while Denise was packing lunch boxes and trying to convince Caleb that yes, he did need to wear a jacket to school. Lisa Thompson's voice was tight with controlled excitement. Jennifer Walsh wants to meet with us today. And there are 2 more women who've reached out through Stephanie. This is moving faster than I expected. Denise glanced at the clock. I can be there by 10. The kids. Bring them to my office if you need to. I have a conference room they can do homework in. This is important, Denise. 3 hours later, Denise sat in Lisa's conference room with 4 other women, each carrying her own folder of documentation, each with her own story of discrimination and retaliation at Pinnacle Marketing. The similarities were striking and heartbreaking. Jennifer Walsh, a soft-spoken woman in her late 20s, had endured months of sexual harassment from her supervisor. When she tried to report it, HR had suggested she was misinterpreting friendly behavior and recommended she work on her communication style. Angela Rodriguez had been repeatedly passed over for promotion despite leading the department in sales numbers. When she'd asked for feedback, she'd been told she needed to be less aggressive and more collaborative. Sarah Kim had been systematically excluded from client meetings and decision-making processes, then criticized for not being strategic enough in her thinking. Each woman had a breaking point. Each had been isolated and made to feel like the problem was personal, not systemic. And each had been fired or forced to resign shortly after raising concerns. They have a playbook, Lisa said, spreading the documentation across the table. Isolate, gaslight, retaliate, remove. It's textbook discrimination. Stephanie, who'd been quietly taking notes, looked up. There's something else. I still have access to the company's shared drive. They haven't revoked my credentials yet. There are files in there that might be relevant. Absolutely not, Lisa said firmly. We can't use anything obtained through unauthorized access. It would compromise the entire case. But what if I downloaded them before I was fired? As part of my regular work. Lisa considered this. What kind of files? Performance reviews, promotion decisions, salary information. I was working on a department analysis project before they let me go. The room went quiet as everyone processed the implications. If Stephanie had legitimate work-related access to that information, it could provide the smoking gun they needed to prove systematic discrimination. We'll need to be very careful about how we handle this, Lisa said. But if you have documentation that was part of your assigned duties, that's different. As the meeting continued, Denise found herself studying the other women. They were all educated, accomplished professionals who'd done everything right, worked hard, followed rules, tried to succeed within the system. And the system had failed all of them. I need to ask all of you something, she said during a break. Are you prepared for what this means? A class action lawsuit will be public. There will be media attention, scrutiny, probably attempts to discredit us personally. Angela nodded grimly. They already destroyed my career. What else can they do? They can try to destroy your reputation, Jennifer said quietly. I've been researching other employment discrimination cases. The companies hire investigators, look into your personal life, try to find anything they can use to discredit you. Sarah shifted uncomfortably. My family immigrated here when I was 10. My parents are terrified of any kind of legal trouble. They think I should just find another job and move on. The weight of their decision settled over the room. This wasn't just about legal strategy or potential financial compensation. It was about 5 women choosing to make themselves targets in order to create change. We don't all have to participate, Denise said. This is a personal decision for each of you. But we're stronger together, Stephanie said. That's the whole point. They isolated us individually, made us think we were the problem. Together, we can show the pattern. Dr. Amara Jones, the child psychologist Pastor Gloria had connected Denise with, had warned her about this moment. Children are incredibly perceptive, she'd said. They'll sense the stress even if they don't understand the details. Be honest with them about what you're doing and why. That evening, after homework was finished and dinner dishes were cleared, Denise sat with Imani and Caleb on the living room couch. They'd been patient with her frequent phone calls and meetings, accepting her explanations that Mama is working on some important business stuff. You know how Mama lost her job? She began. Both children nodded. Caleb was working on a drawing, his tongue poking out in concentration. Well, it turns out the company I worked for wasn't treating women fairly. They were giving promotions and opportunities to men instead of women, even when the women were doing better work. Imani looked up from her book. That's not fair. No, it's not. And it turns out it happened to other women too, not just me. So what are you going to do about it? Imani asked with the directness that always surprised adults. I'm going to court to prove that what they did was wrong. There will be lawyers and judges, and it might take a long time. Caleb stopped drawing. Like on TV? With the hammer thing? Something like that, yes. Will you get in trouble? He asked, his 6-year-old mind immediately jumping to consequences. No, baby. What I'm doing is legal and right. But some people might not like it, and they might say mean things about me in the newspaper or on TV. Imani processed this information with the seriousness of someone far older than 8. Are you scared? Denise considered lying, giving them a sanitized version that would be easier to digest. But Dr. Jones had emphasized the importance of honesty. Yes, sometimes I am scared. But I'm doing it anyway because it's the right thing to do. And because I want to make sure other women don't have to go through what I went through. Like being a superhero, Caleb said matter-of-factly, returning to his drawing. What do you mean, sweetie? Miss Sandra at church said superheroes get scared too. But they do the right thing even when they're scared. That's what makes them heroes. From the mouths of babes. Denise pulled both children closer, overwhelmed by their ability to distill complex moral questions into simple truths. Will Daddy be mad? Imani asked quietly. It was the question Denise had been dreading. David had already made his feelings about her causing trouble clear. A public lawsuit would likely strain their already fragile co-parenting relationship. Daddy might not understand why this is important to me, she said carefully. But that's between Daddy and me. It doesn't change how much he loves you, and it doesn't change how much I love you. That night, after the children were asleep, Denise called David. She owed him a heads up about what was coming, for the children's sake if nothing else. A class action lawsuit? His voice was tight with disbelief. Denise, what are you thinking? Do you understand what this will do to our family's reputation? I'm thinking about justice, David. About making sure this doesn't happen to other women. What about what it does to our children? Having their mother's name in the newspapers, associated with this kind of controversy? Our children will learn that their mother stood up for what was right. That she didn't stay silent when she witnessed injustice. They'll learn that their mother couldn't let things go, couldn't move on and rebuild her life quietly. The conversation deteriorated from there, ending with David threatening to seek modification of their custody arrangement if the lawsuit brought negative attention to the children. It was an empty threat, he had no legal grounds, but it stung nonetheless. Later, as Denise lay in bed staring at the ceiling, she thought about the choice she was making. The safe path would be to accept a small settlement, sign a non-disclosure agreement, and rebuild her career quietly. The brave path was to fight publicly, knowing it would expose her family to scrutiny and stress. But as she thought about Jennifer's quiet voice describing months of harassment, about Angela's frustration at being labeled too aggressive for the same behavior that was praised in men, about Sarah's parents' immigrant fear of making waves, she knew she couldn't choose safety over justice. Her phone buzzed with a text from Tanya. Saw the news about Pinnacle hiring a crisis management firm. You're rattling some cages, sister. Denise smiled in the darkness. If Pinnacle was hiring crisis managers, it meant they were taking the lawsuit seriously. It meant they were scared. Good. They should be. The story broke on a Thursday morning in November, 2 weeks after the class action lawsuit was officially filed. Denise was dropping the children off at school when her phone started buzzing with notifications from news alerts, text messages, and missed calls. Pinnacle Marketing faces class action discrimination lawsuit, read the headline from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Below it was a photo of the company's downtown office building and a smaller headshot of Denise from her old LinkedIn profile. Her stomach dropped as she read the opening paragraph. 5 former employees of Pinnacle Marketing, led by plaintiff Denise Harper, alleged systematic gender discrimination and retaliation in a lawsuit filed in federal court. Mama, you look worried, Imani observed from the back seat. Just some work stuff, baby. You focus on having a good day at school. But even as she said it, Denise wondered how long they could shield the children from the attention this would bring. The school might see the news. Other parents might recognize her name. The anonymity they'd been clinging to was officially gone. By the time she got home, there were 3 voice messages from reporters requesting interviews and 2 from television news producers. Lisa had warned her this would happen, but the reality of it felt overwhelming. Her phone rang with Lisa's number. I've already had 6 media calls this morning, Lisa said without preamble. This is good, it means the story has legs. But we need to be strategic about how we handle it. I don't want to do interviews. I just want to focus on the case. I understand, but media attention can work in our favor. It puts pressure on Pinnacle and might encourage other women to come forward. Plus, it controls the narrative. If we don't tell our story, someone else will tell it for us. They agreed that Lisa would handle most media requests, but that Denise should consider doing 1 or 2 carefully selected interviews to put a human face on the lawsuit. The rest of the morning was a blur of phone calls and strategy sessions. Stephanie called to report that her former colleagues were already gossiping about the lawsuit. Jennifer had received a threatening call from someone claiming to represent Pinnacle's interests. Angela's new employer had called her in for a clarification meeting about her past legal issues. The intimidation tactics were already starting. Around noon, Mrs. Ruby knocked on the door with a covered plate and a concerned expression. "Honey, I saw the news," she said, settling into her usual kitchen chair. How are you holding up? Honestly, I'm terrified. I keep wondering if I made the right choice dragging my family into this. Mrs. Ruby fixed her with a stern look. Let me tell you something, child. I've been watching you for months now, seeing how you handle yourself with grace under pressure. You think this is about you making trouble, but it's not. This is about you having the courage to speak truth to power. But what if it hurts the children? What if? What if you teach them that their mama stands up for what's right? What if you show them that sometimes you have to fight for justice even when it's hard? Mrs. Ruby's voice was gentle but firm. Those babies of yours are watching how you handle this. You're teaching them what strength looks like. The conversation was interrupted by a knock at the front door. Through the peephole, Denise could see a young man with a camera and a woman holding a microphone. Channel 2 News, the woman called. We'd like to speak with Denise Harper about the Pinnacle marketing lawsuit. Denise didn't answer, but the reality of her new circumstances hit home. Reporters were literally at her door. Her private life was becoming public property. That afternoon, when she picked up the children from the church program, Sandra Williams pulled her aside. Some of the parents have been asking questions, Sandra said carefully, about the news coverage. I wanted you to know that we're fully supportive of what you're doing, but I thought you should be aware. What kind of questions? Mostly just curiosity. But there was one parent who seemed concerned about controversy affecting the program. Sandra's expression made it clear what she thought of that parent's opinion. Dr. Franklin told her that we're proud to support families who stand up for justice. Still, Denise felt the weight of scrutiny settling over every aspect of her life. Even her children's after-school program was fielding questions about her choices. That evening, as they sat down for dinner, Imani looked up from her spaghetti with a serious expression. Mama, Madison's mom asked her if you were the lady on the news. Denise's heart sank. What did Madison say? She said yes, and that Madison's mom said you were causing trouble for a big company. Imani paused. But I told Madison that you're fighting for what's right like we talked about. What did Madison's mom say to that? She said maybe some fights aren't worth having. Imani's 8-year-old voice carried a weight of confusion. But I don't understand that. If something is right, isn't it always worth fighting for? Caleb looked up from his plate. Miss Sandra says sometimes grown-ups are scared of change, even when change is good. Their simple wisdom cut through all of Denise's anxiety and self-doubt. Her children understood something that apparently some adults didn't, that justice was worth pursuing even when it was difficult. Her phone rang with David's number, and she stepped into the living room to take the call. I've had 3 people call me today about seeing you on the news, he said without greeting. My boss asked if I was the ex-husband of that woman suing Pinnacle. And what did you tell him? I told him it was complicated. David's voice was strained. Denise, this is exactly what I was worried about. The kids are going to face questions, judgment, attention they don't need. The kids are handling this better than the adults, she said firmly. They understand why this matters. Do they understand what it's like to have their private lives dissected in public? Do they understand that this could follow them for years? Do you understand that staying silent about injustice teaches them that some people's comfort is more important than other people's rights? They argued in circles for 10 more minutes before David hung up in frustration. But his words stayed with her. This could follow the children for years. Was she being selfish, prioritizing her fight for justice over her children's privacy and peace? That night, after the children were asleep, she sat in her living room with a cup of tea and really looked at her life. The house they'd bought together was quiet around her, full of memories and dreams that had been shattered by David's abandonment. In 6 months, she'd lost her job, her marriage, and her financial security. Now she was risking what remained of her privacy and peace. But she'd also found her voice. She'd discovered a community of support she hadn't known existed. She'd learned that she was stronger than she'd ever imagined. And she was fighting for something bigger than herself. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Saw you on the news. Thank you for speaking up. I went through the same thing at my company but was too scared to fight. You're giving me courage. A sister in solidarity. Then another, former Pinnacle employee here. What you're doing matters. I wish I'd been brave enough to join you. And another, single mom fighting discrimination at my job. Your courage is inspiring me to file my own complaint. One by one, messages poured in from women she'd never met but who saw themselves in her story. Women who'd been silenced, intimidated, or pushed out of jobs for speaking up. Women who were finding their own courage through her example. By the time she went to bed, she'd received over 30 messages of support. Some from strangers, some from old friends who'd seen the news coverage. all of them reminding her that this fight was about more than her individual situation. She was no longer just Denise Harper, the woman who'd lost her job and her husband in the same day. She was Denise Harper, the woman who'd refused to stay silent about injustice. The woman who'd given other women permission to speak their truth. It was a responsibility she hadn't asked for, but one she was finally ready to embrace fully. The community meeting at Mount Olive Baptist Church was Pastor Gloria's idea, but it had taken on a life of its own. What started as a small gathering to discuss supporting families facing legal challenges had grown into something much larger after word spread through the neighborhood and beyond. On a cold December evening, 3 weeks after the news story broke, Denise found herself standing in front of nearly 200 people in the church's fellowship hall. She'd agreed to speak, but now, looking at the sea of faces, mostly black women but also men, families, young professionals, and elderly community members, she felt her courage wavering. "You've got this," Tanya whispered from beside her. "These are your people." Pastor Gloria took the microphone first, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd been advocating for justice her entire life. "We're here tonight because one of our own has chosen to stand up against injustice, and we want to make sure she knows she's not standing alone," Pastor Gloria began. "But this isn't just about Denise Harper's case. This is about all of us, about the challenges we face in workplaces that weren't built for us, about the courage it takes to demand better." She introduced Denise, who walked to the podium on unsteady legs. The crowd was quiet, expectant. In the front row, she could see Mrs. Ruby nodding encouragingly. Tanya gave her a thumbs up. Even Imani and Caleb, who were supposed to be in the children's program, had snuck into the back with Sandra Williams, watching their mother with pride. "6 months ago, I thought I was living the American dream," Denise began, her voice finding strength as she spoke. "I had a good job, a nice house, 2 beautiful children, and a husband who I thought supported my ambitions. I thought if I worked hard enough, if I was excellent enough, if I stayed quiet about the unfairness I witnessed, I could build a secure life for my family." She paused, looking out at faces that reflected understanding and recognition. "But excellence without equity is just exhaustion. And staying quiet about injustice doesn't protect you from becoming its next victim." The room was completely silent now, hanging on her words. "When I lost my job for filing a discrimination complaint, I thought my story was over. When my husband left me on the same day telling me I should have kept my head down, I thought I'd lost everything. But what I discovered is that sometimes losing everything you thought you wanted clears the space for you to fight for what you actually need." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. "I need to live in a world where my daughter doesn't have to choose between speaking up and keeping her job. I need to work in places that value my contributions, not just tolerate my presence. I need my son to grow up understanding that supporting women's equality isn't optional, it's moral." The applause started slowly, then built to something thunderous. Denise felt tears on her cheeks but kept speaking. "This lawsuit isn't just about me or the women I'm fighting alongside. It's about creating space for the next woman who faces discrimination to know that she has options beyond silence and acceptance. It's about building workplaces where our daughters won't have to fight the same battles we're fighting." When she finished speaking, the response was overwhelming. Woman after woman stood to share their own stories, discrimination faced, opportunities denied, times they'd stayed silent when they should have spoken up. A young teacher talked about salary disparities in her school district. A nurse described harassment from male colleagues. A small business owner shared the challenges of being taken seriously by vendors and clients. But they also shared stories of resistance and resilience. A group of women who'd started their own marketing firm after facing discrimination at established agencies. A support network for Black women in tech that provided mentorship and advocacy. A legal aid organization that helped women navigate workplace discrimination pro bono. "What I'm hearing," Pastor Gloria said as the formal testimony wound down, "is that Sister Denise's courage has given all of us permission to examine our own situations and consider our own options for creating change." Dr. Franklin from New Beginnings stood up from the middle of the crowd. "I have an announcement. Our organization has received a grant to expand our programming to include legal advocacy for women facing workplace discrimination. We're hiring 2 new positions, a legal advocate and a community organizer. And we'd like to offer both positions to women right here in this room." He looked directly at Denise. "The first position would involve working with women who are considering filing discrimination complaints, helping them understand their rights and connecting them with resources. It's part-time to start, with the flexibility to accommodate legal proceedings." The offer was unexpected and perfect. Denise felt a surge of gratitude and possibility. The second position, Dr. Franklin continued, would involve building networks of support for women in various industries, organizing educational workshops and creating mentorship programs. He scanned the crowd. We're looking for someone with lived experience who can help other women find their voices. A woman Denise had never met stood up from the back. I'd like to apply for that second position. I've been in tech for 15 years, and I'm tired of being the only black woman in every room I enter. By the end of the evening, 5 women had expressed interest in starting a local chapter of an organization supporting women of color in corporate environments. 3 small business owners had offered to provide services at reduced rates for women going through legal proceedings. And a retired employment lawyer had volunteered to provide free consultations for anyone considering filing discrimination complaints. You started something, Mrs. Ruby told Denise as they walked to their cars. You gave folks permission to stop suffering in silence. As they drove home, with the children chattering excitedly in the back seat about all the important adults they'd met, Denise felt a shift in her understanding of what she was doing. This wasn't just about her individual case anymore. It had become about building a movement, creating change that would outlast any single lawsuit. Her phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. Pinnacle's lawyers want to schedule a mediation meeting. They're feeling the pressure. Are you ready to hear what they're offering? Denise stared at the message for a long moment. 6 months ago, the prospect of settlement would have felt like salvation, a way to end the uncertainty and move on with her life. Now it felt more complicated. The lawsuit had become bigger than her personal grievances. It had become a platform for change. What's mediation? Imani asked from the back seat, apparently reading over her shoulder. It's when both sides in a legal case try to reach an agreement without going to trial. Are you going to agree to stop fighting? Leave it to her 8-year-old to cut right to the heart of the matter. I don't know yet, sweetheart. It depends on what they're offering and whether it would help other women facing the same problems. I think you should only stop fighting if they promise to treat women better, Caleb chimed in. Otherwise it might happen to someone else. Their wisdom continued to astound her. At 6 and 8, they understood something that many adults missed, that individual relief without systemic change was incomplete justice. That night, as she tucked them into bed, Imani looked up at her with serious eyes. Mama, I'm proud of you for being brave. Even when it's hard. Thank you, baby. That means everything to me. Will you teach me how to be brave like you when I grow up? Denise smoothed her daughter's hair, thinking about the world she wanted to leave for this remarkable child. You're already brave, sweetheart. You just need to remember that bravery isn't about not being scared. It's about doing what's right even when you are scared. As she turned off the lights and headed to her own room, Denise reflected on how much had changed in 6 months. She'd lost a job and a marriage, but she'd found her voice in her community. She'd gained clarity about what mattered most and the courage to fight for it. Tomorrow she'd call Lisa and discuss the mediation offer. But tonight, she'd rest in the knowledge that whatever happened next, she was no longer fighting alone. The mediation took place on a gray January morning in a downtown conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. 6 months after her termination, Denise found herself sitting across a polished table from Robert Chin and 3 attorneys representing Pinnacle Marketing. Lisa had prepared her for this moment, but nothing could have readied her for the surreal experience of facing the man who'd fired her with such casual cruelty. He looked smaller than she remembered, uncomfortable in his expensive suit, avoiding eye contact with any of the 5 women who were dismantling his company's defense piece by piece. Our clients are prepared to offer a settlement package of $2.8 million, to be divided among the 5 plaintiffs, the lead attorney announced, sliding documents across the table. In exchange for signing non-disclosure agreements and dropping all claims. It was an enormous amount of money, more than Denise made in 5 years at Pinnacle. Her share alone would secure her children's future, pay off the mortgage, eliminate every financial worry that had kept her awake since David left. But as Lisa had warned her, the offer came with strings. Non-disclosure agreements that would prevent them from discussing their experiences. No admission of wrongdoing from Pinnacle. No requirement for the company to change its practices. What about systemic changes? Lisa asked. Training programs, oversight, policy modifications to prevent future discrimination? The lead attorney's smile was condescending. Our client maintains that no discrimination occurred, so such measures would be unnecessary. Denise felt the familiar surge of anger at the gaslighting, the refusal to acknowledge reality even in the face of overwhelming evidence. Beside her, Jennifer shifted uncomfortably. Angela's jaw was set in a hard line. Stephanie was taking notes, her expression grim. "We need time to discuss this with our clients," Lisa said diplomatically. During the break, the 5 women huddled in a smaller conference room down the hall. The weight of the decision pressed down on all of them. "It's a lot of money," Sarah said quietly. "Life-changing money. But it doesn't change anything for the women who work there now," Angela pointed out. "Or the ones who'll be hired next." Jennifer, who'd been mostly quiet throughout the proceedings, finally spoke up. "I keep thinking about what happens to the next woman who files a harassment complaint. If we take this deal and stay quiet, she'll face the same system we faced." Stephanie nodded. "They're betting that we care more about our individual financial security than we do about creating change." All eyes turned to Denise. As the lead plaintiff, her voice carried the most weight. "What do you all think?" "I think," Angela said slowly, "that 6 months ago, any of us would have jumped at this offer. But 6 months ago we were isolated and scared. Now we know we're not alone." "The community meeting changed everything for me," Sarah added. Hearing all those other women's stories, seeing how our courage gave them permission to examine their own situations. "I can't unknow that now." Denise thought about the women who'd approached her after the news coverage, the stories shared at the church meeting, the teenagers who'd told her they were inspired to study law because of her example. The money was important, but it wasn't everything. "I think we counteroffer," she said finally. "Same financial terms but no non-disclosure agreements. And they have to implement a comprehensive anti-discrimination program with third-party oversight." When they returned to the main conference room and Lisa presented their counteroffer, the change in atmosphere was immediate. Robert Chen's attorneys huddled in urgent whispers. The lead counsel's professional composure slipped noticeably. "Our clients won't agree to those terms," he said finally. "Then we'll see you in court," Lisa replied with a smile. As they gathered their papers and prepared to leave, Robert Chen finally made eye contact with Denise. For just a moment she saw something that might have been regret flicker across his face. But then it was gone, replaced by the cold calculation she remembered from that terrible day in his office. Walking out of the building into the crisp January air, Denise felt lighter than she had in months. They'd chosen principle over convenience, long-term change over short-term relief. It was scary and empowering at the same time. "You know this means the trial will probably happen," Lisa warned as they stood on the sidewalk. "It could take another year, maybe more. Are you all prepared for that?" Each woman nodded in turn. They'd come too far to back down now. 3 months later, Denise was settling into her new routine as a legal advocate at New Beginnings when Lisa called with news that changed everything. "They want to settle again," Lisa said, excitement barely contained in her voice. "But this time they're agreeing to most of our terms." The new offer was unprecedented. $4.2 million in damages, comprehensive policy changes including mandatory bias training and third-party monitoring, and most importantly, no non-disclosure agreements. Pinnacle would also fund a scholarship program for women pursuing careers in marketing and communications. "What changed?" Denise asked. "2 things. First, 3 more women have come forward with discrimination complaints against them. The publicity from our case encouraged others to speak up. Second, they've lost 2 major clients who cited concerns about their workplace culture. It's hitting them where it really hurts, their bottom line." The settlement was finalized on a beautiful May morning, almost exactly 1 year after Denise's termination. The 5 women gathered in Lisa's office to sign the papers, their faces reflecting a mixture of relief, satisfaction, and amazement at what they'd accomplished. "I keep thinking about that first day we all met here," Stephanie said as they prepared for a celebration lunch. "We were so isolated, so convinced we were the problem. And now Pinnacle has to report their diversity statistics publicly every quarter," Angela added with satisfaction. "They can't hide behind vague promises about commitment to equality anymore." That evening, there was a celebration at Mount Olive Baptist Church that drew nearly 300 people. The fellowship hall was decorated with balloons and banners, the tables groaning under the weight of potluck dishes that represented the incredible diversity of their support network. Pastor Gloria stood to address the crowd, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd seen many battles for justice. "Tonight we celebrate not just a legal victory, but a community victory," she began. "Sister Denise and her co-plaintiffs didn't just win money, though praise the Lord, they won enough to secure their families' futures. They won something more important. They won the right for all of us to work in dignity." The applause was thunderous, but Pastor Gloria wasn't finished. "But the real victory is what happened in this room in our community over the past year. We learned to support each other through the storm. We learned that individual courage can inspire collective action. And we learned that sometimes losing everything you thought you wanted is just making room for something better. When Denise was called to speak, she looked out at the crowd and saw faces that had become dear to her over the past year. Mrs. Ruby, beaming with pride from the front row. Dr. Franklin and the staff from New Beginnings, who'd given her a purpose beyond her personal grievances. Sandra Williams and the children from the after-school program, including Imani and Caleb, who were practically vibrating with excitement. A year ago, I thought my story was ending, Denise began. I'd lost my job, my marriage was falling apart, and I felt like I'd failed at everything that mattered. But what I learned is that sometimes what feels like an ending is actually a beginning. She paused, gathering her thoughts. I learned that community isn't just the people who celebrate with you when things are going well. Community is the people who show up when your world is falling apart and help you rebuild it stronger than before. She looked directly at Mrs. Ruby, at Pastor Gloria, at Tanya, at all the women who'd shared their stories and their support. I learned that staying quiet about injustice doesn't protect you from it, it just makes you complicit in your own oppression. And I learned that sometimes the scariest thing you can do is also the most necessary thing. The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on her words. But most importantly, I learned that my children were watching everything. How I handled adversity, how I responded to injustice, how I treated people who tried to help me. They were learning what strength looks like, what integrity looks like, what it means to fight for something bigger than yourself. She gestured toward Imani and Caleb, who were sitting with Sandra but watching their mother with rapt attention. 6 months from now, I'll start law school at Emory University, thanks to the settlement and the scholarship programs we fought for. My children will grow up knowing that their mother didn't just survive injustice, she fought back and won. But more than that, they'll grow up in a world that's a little bit more fair because we refuse to stay silent. As the evening wound down and people began to leave, Denise found herself standing in the church parking lot with her children, looking up at the stars that were just becoming visible in the deepening twilight. Mama, Imani said, slipping her hand into Denise's, I understand now why you had to fight. Why's that, sweetheart? Because some things are more important than being comfortable. Some things are worth fighting for even when it's hard. Caleb, now 7 and more articulate than he'd been during the worst of their struggles, nodded solemnly. And because you wanted to make things better for other people too, not just us. As they drove home through the familiar streets of their East Atlanta neighborhood, past Mrs. Ruby's house with its perfect roses, past the church that had become their sanctuary, past the community that had rallied around them, Denise felt a deep sense of completion. She'd lost a job and a marriage, but she'd found her voice and her purpose. She'd endured public scrutiny and private doubt, but she'd emerged stronger and clearer about what mattered most. She'd started the year as a victim of discrimination and ended it as an advocate for change. Most importantly, she'd raised her children to understand that justice wasn't something you waited for someone else to deliver, it was something you fought for, one brave decision at a time. As they pulled into their driveway, Imani asked the question that would shape their future. Mama, when you become a lawyer, will you help other people fight like you fought? Yes, baby girl. That's exactly what I plan to do. And for the first time in a very long time, Denise Harper knew exactly where she was headed and why it mattered.